Have you wanted to learn more about the WTA and ATP forehand biomechanics and technique? Well, stay tuned. We're going to talk about it on this video here. I'm Chris Lewitt, RSPA, PTR, CTPS, and TSS. I'm a top junior coach. I coach many number one juniors in the U.S. We're going to talk about the forehand. Let's start with Sloane Stephens. Look at the size of this loop. Giant bubble loop, which is very typical of the WTA style. She has a cramped elbow position. And one of the things I wanted to note was the incredible lag that she has here. You can see that right about here, very good lag. And then the racket is accelerating to the ball using generating a lot of racket speed from this giant loop and from internal shoulder rotation. And what you can see here is that her elbow is bent about 90 degrees. She doesn't get a full straight arm extension like a lot of the men do. Here we have Madison Keys, who has a very similar style. She's a little more compact. Her racket doesn't go past the midline as far as Sloane Stephens does. So she does pass the midline, but not quite as far as Sloane, whose racket is almost parallel to the baseline. She gets a great lag here, and she has, again, about 90 degrees, more or less, of extension at the elbow. You see a nice windshield wiper there from Madison. And she has a very clean technique. Her grip's not as extreme as Sloane. Sloane has a Western grip. Madison Keys has a semi-Western grip. You can see the beginning here, the racket's very high above the head. So there's a big high loop, and there's a big loop in terms of going around the body position. Good lag here. The elbow's in close to the trunk, which is typical of the WTA style. And you see a nice internal shoulder rotation here as she pronates and internally rotates her shoulder to finish the swing. In comparison, Coco here is more compact. She has a full Western grip like Sloane, so not a semi-Western like Madison. And her backswing is much more compact. The racket does come high above the head, similar to Sloane and Keys. But she doesn't take the racket nearly as far across her body in terms of crossing the midline. Her racket stays probably around the midline 6 p.m. mark, which is typical of a type 2 swing. Type 1 swing is like a Sloane Stephens. Madison Keys is also a type 1 swing with the racket coming fully around the body and getting almost parallel to the baseline. Coco has more of a type 2 swing, so more compact. But if you notice, as she swings through the hitting zone, her elbow comes inside and she bends her arm in a pronounced way and doesn't get a lot of ISR, at least on this swing. So she swings through the ball, the elbow's bent, and she just lifts her elbow up to her shoulder and doesn't get a lot of rotation in the using the internal shoulder rotator. So she looks a bit cramped here. It's not quite as optimized, but at least she's more compact on the take back. She does get some lag, so her swing's less not as big, but a little cramped. Halep, on the other hand, is a good type 2 model, WTA swing. Look how high the racket head is above her head there. So very similar to Sloane Stephens and Madison Keys and Coco, but there's more fluidity in Halep's swing. She gets a nice lag here, as you'll see. The racket's going to lag well. She's going to pull that racket head through. And you're going to see the arm position here is better extended. There's much better spacing. This is what I'd like to see for female players that I coach, the girls that I coach. You'd like to see better spacing through the impact rather than being cramped like Coco was in the last clip. Halep has nice fluidity. She's loose and has a good rhythm in her swing. It's a very good-looking, aesthetically pleasing swing. Here's Halep on the return of serve, where you'd expect her to be a little more compact in the backswing. And you'll see that the backswing is approximately 6 p.m., so around the midline. You can see here in the beginning the vertical take back of the racket head, which is typical of WTA style. She comes around with the loop and a little bit behind her body, but it's not as extreme as Sloane, for example, in terms of where the racket ends up around her body. She has a semi-Western grip versus a Western grip. that Coco and Sloane has. And you see a little bit of better spacing here as she makes room for the ball. Her arm is probably 110 degrees. Her elbow's extending 110 degrees, so she has pretty good extensions for a WTA swing. And then she has a good finish, windshield wiper finish around her body, which is her shoulder rotating, primarily her shoulder rotation. Kasatkina, on the other hand, she has a very ATP style. You can see the beginning. Watch the beginning here where the racket points to the incoming ball. The elbow's high. This is very typical of a lot of male players, so it looks like a male swing. It's also next gen in the sense that she turns her racket face away from the ball. So Jennifer Brady here also does the same thing. Jennifer Brady turns her racket, very similar to Kasatkina, she turns her racket face away from the ball. So she extra pronates her forearm in the beginning of the swing as she moves to the ball. I think Jennifer Brady and Kasatkina are great examples of the modern ATP swing.